Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Crexy Podcast, an insider's look at all things commercial real estate. In this show, we cover a broad range of topics that cater to CRE newcomers and industry leaders alike. I'm your host, Jessica LaRusso, Regional Director, and today we're thrilled to sit down with David Murphy. A little bit about our guest. David Murphy is an Executive Vice President with CBRE. In 2021, David was recognized as CBRE's top overall producer in the state of Florida for the second consecutive year. David oversees a multidisciplined industrial logistics team whose market knowledge, creativity, and industry relationships provide winning solutions for his clients. Over his 23-year career at CBRE, he has been named the NAMP of Central Florida Industrial Broker of the Year 18 times. And is routinely recognized at the CBRE Recognition Summit as one of the top producing brokers in the firm. David began his real estate career in State College, PA, during his freshman year at the Pennsylvania State University, where he graduated with a Bachelor's of Science degree in real estate. A member of Penn State's men's ice hockey team, David was inducted into the Penn State Hockey Hall of Fame and also played professionally in the East Coast Hockey League. Wow, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jessica. It's a real honor to be here. That sounded fantastic. We could just keep going if you want to keep going with that.
Awesome. Well, I know we just covered a lot about your background, but I'd love to learn a lot more about your career path and some of the lessons you learned along the way. So maybe let's get started about where you're from and really how you first got into commercial real estate.
Absolutely. So I'm from Western Pennsylvania, and I grew up in a real estate family. My dad had a couple of residential brokerage offices, and he also did commercial appraisal work. And so I grew up kind of watching him and learning the business from him. I was one of those people that didn't just fall into real estate. I wanted to do real estate ever since I was a little kid, and it just seemed like awesome. I looked at our neighborhood, and in our neighborhood, there were all doctors and attorneys, and then my dad who never went to college. And I'm like, I think I want to do what he's doing. And so I got my real estate licensing classes done when I was 17 and got my real estate license in Pennsylvania on my 18th birthday because that was the state law. You had to be 18. So I'm at least tied for the youngest real estate agent, licensed agent out there. But what I did was I thought for a second about not even going to college, that I could just do real estate right away and get out. But I had a chance to play hockey at Penn State. And so I went to Penn State. But while I was there, I got a job with a company that at the time was called Kissinger, Leonard and Brower. And KLB was a really strong brokerage company in State College, and I worked for them. And when I went to interview with Ralph Brower, who was running the office at the time, he said he had not had great luck with the college kids and wasn't really interested in hiring me. So I had to go back 4 or 5 times to finally get a job. And with him, the only job that they would give me was as a runner. And what did a runner do at a residential office at the time? This is going to be hard for people. A lot of the folks listening to this podcast to understand, but back in the day, and this is in the late 80s, early 90s, there was no property appraiser's website. And so if you wanted to get information about a property, you had to drive to the courthouse and find the actual hard copy of the data sheet and make a photocopy of it. And so I ended up offering my services to go and do that because I had done that for my dad when I was a kid over the summers. When I was 13, 14, he'd drop me off at the courthouse all day and I'd just get these property cards. So I kind of knew how to do it. And so I did that. And then eventually they let me sell some houses. And then I got connected with a commercial real estate agent, Scott Yoakum, who at the time was with that firm as well. And kind of learned a little bit of the commercial business from him and Jack Heckendorn and a couple other guys that were in that State College market. And went back after I graduated, worked for my dad for a couple of years and got into the commercial appraisal business. And then when I was 24, I started my own appraisal company in State College. I went back to State College, opened up my own appraisal company, and I thought this was great. But what I realized, Jessica, was I liked pitching the business to get the appraisal, but I didn't like doing the book report, which is the actual appraisal itself, right? And so I realized this is probably not, even though I was doing really, really well for a 24-year-old kid, I just realized this wasn't going to be a long-term strategy. So my parents bought a house in Central Florida as a second home. I came down to visit, fell in love with the area, hooked up with a commercial appraiser, Randy Rex, who was really a well-known appraiser in the Central Florida market, worked for him for a few months, and then segued over into commercial real estate. I went to see Bill Moss, who was the managing director of, at the time it was CB Commercial. And this was back in 1997, and went in and I knew nobody in Orlando. I literally went down there just because I fell in love with the market, but didn't know anybody in there. And just, it didn't look like I'd have a real good opportunity of success, but he found something in me that he liked. And so he hired me. And at the time, they had just had one of their industrial brokers retire. So that was my spot. I didn't, love industrial. I didn't hate industrial. I would have done, if they had said, hey, we have an opportunity in land, you'd be talking to a land broker right now, right? So a lot of times that is how you fall into things. I came into this industrial because that was the opening. And at the time, industrial was not cool. Okay, so the hierarchy when I started was office brokers were number one on the list. And then it was the multifamily broker. And then it kind of went down, a big drop down from there. And industrial was somewhere like in the penalty box. It was not the specialty. People felt bad for me. They were like, man, I'm sorry you got your industrial. So, but that's how I started. And 26 years later, I'm still here.
That's incredible. And wow, to think about how industrial was like low man on the totem pole back then. Look at industrial now, right?
Yes.
Who were some of your mentors once you segued over to commercial, right? Really, and how did they help shape your career path?
Well, I would say first and foremost, my dad is my number one mentor. He's done a great job. And again, I grew up in a real estate family. My uncle does commercial construction and was in real estate deals, and I learned from him. And my younger brother is in Pittsburgh now, and he's very successful on the property management side. So I have a lot of go-to folks just within the family. But some of the exterior or non-family members that were mentors, my hockey coach at Penn State was great, right? I was undersized, to put it lightly, and not many other strong college hockey programs were taking a look at me, but Coach Joe Batista took a chance on me, knew I had heart, and he was a big believer in this saying that he always said, hard work beats talent if talent doesn't work hard. And I've just kind of internalized that. And I knew, what could I control? Well, I can't control that I'm undersized, but I can control that I'm going to outwork everyone, right? That I'm going to be the first one at practice, the last to leave. And those lessons that I learned through sports and through that experience really kind of laid the groundwork for my success in my career later on. And then another mentor, Bill Moss, who ran our CBRE office for 20 plus years, he really took me under his wing and got me started. And he was great in the beginning because, Jessica, it's so hard when you start in commercial real estate, you get no positive feedback. When I started, it wasn't like today. Now everybody's on a team. And you start as a junior member on the team and you're immediately exposed to deals and you kind of work your way up, right? When I started, we didn't have teams. Teaming was not a thing back in the beginning of 1998 in our office. And so when I started, I was given a phone and we didn't really, I don't even remember if we were hooked onto the internet back then. I think I might have had a phone book, right? And they were like, go for it. And that was essentially how I had to learn. And it was very discouraging. And so Bill did a good job of keeping my head right after rejection, but it made me a strong broker because I had to learn essentially all three facets of the business. You find, win, and execute business. And starting out without a team, you kind of had to do all three. And so I look back at that, and although I wouldn't wish it on a lot of people, it was rough, I think is part of what led me to the success that I have today.
I love that. I really love that saying from your hockey coach, by the way. So talking about like early days, right? A lot of rejection, kind of learning on your own. Did you have any favorite mistakes maybe that happened early on that maybe you didn't recognize at the time, but turned out to be a really important lesson?
Time management. And everyone that calls me or reaches out to me today, the first thing is you got to have good time management skills. And I did not. And what I mean by that is I was so anxious to get involved in a deal that I would spend hours working on a broker opinion of value that with a property owner that probably didn't even want to sell, but I would just work on it, right? One of my biggest mistakes was I agreed to do a property tour on a Saturday morning, right? And that in of itself doesn't sound bad, but the client told me to pick him up at one of the Disney resorts. And then when I went to pick him up, he had shorts and he looked like he had jumped right out of the pool. And I realized after driving him around for 30 minutes and I brought him back, I realized I was just his write-off, right, for his trip. And so I told myself that, I'm like, all right, no more Saturday and Sunday showings ever again in my career. 26 years later, still have a clean slate of no weekend showings. And what I learned from that is if it's a really important deal, they're going to find it, it's going to be important for them to get it done. They're going to do it. But I think that the other part that I made a mistake on was I probably overestimated what I could get done in a year and underestimated what I could get done in 5. And I would get discouraged that I wasn't making progress, but I didn't see the big picture. Using we were talking hockey, the hockey stick analogy is really good here, where you can work for 3 or 4 or 5 years and get a very minimal return. And then all of a sudden it just goes straight up. And that's really commercial real estate brokerage in a nutshell.
I love that. Having the tenacity to keep going, right? Because you never know when it's going to pop.
Yes.
Love that, David. So transitioning a little bit in our prep call, you mentioned being really passionate about wanting to help people and helping people that are getting into commercial real estate. Can you share a little bit more about that corner of your life with us?
Yeah, I love coaching. I don't see myself ever doing that as a career, but I love to give back and it makes me feel good. So much of this job is grinding and making a lot of calls and trying to get deals done. And our team does 100 plus deals a year every year. So it kind of feels good to give back. And so many people help me. I referenced all those mentors. There's so many others that I just forgot to mention that help me. And I think it's really important. I have a passion. Like I said, I grew up, this is all I've ever wanted to do. And so I have a real passion to share that with the next generation. And I have a pretty good LinkedIn following, and I get a lot of, I guess the kids call them DMs or wherever they send you the message. And a lot of it is, hey, can I get 10 minutes to ask you a question? And I pretty much take all those. And I just feel like I'm giving back because really at the end of the day, money and success and all that, there's only so much to it. And I love thinking that sometime when I pass, people can look and say, oh, that gentleman helped me in some way. And so for me, it's fun. And when you teach and help other people, you learn too. And it keeps me sharp. And the most fun thing I think about this business is what I do today is totally different than what I did 3 years or 5 years ago. The business changes. If you had told me 5 years ago, I would have people would call me the dock high guy, right? Which is my tagline online. We were at a wine event the other night and somebody randomly was like, hey, that's the dock high guy. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. If you would have told me that 5 or 10 years ago that I had to have a strong social media presence to be successful, I would not even have understood that, right? But what we do today is fundamentally different. And so when I help newer folks in the business and give them, it also reminds me to stay sharp. And I think that's so important because in this business, like it or not, you can't rest on you're always getting better or worse. And this is not the kind of business that you can just dial back a notch and be successful. You've got to be all in. And when I can't be all in, then I'll move on to some other career. But right now I'm still trying to make myself better every day.
I love that. So speaking about, right, how quickly this industry changes and as well as the coaching aspect, what do you see or maybe some common mistakes that the younger broker associates are making when they're entering into commercial real estate or things that they should look out for in today's industry?
I think a couple of things. One is relying too much on technology, right? There's a tendency to want to implement AI and all these things. And I agree that AI is not going to take your job, but the person that is using AI could take your job. I agree with the concept, but I think that you can get away from the basic blocking and tackling. We're in a relationship business. That means that you actually have to physically pick up the phone and call the person, right? I think the things that we take for granted, or maybe folks in my generation take for granted, are handwritten notes, are just a direct communication. Today, if you do that, you really stand out. And I think the basic blocking and tackling is something that folks are always looking to hack things today. And in commercial real estate, there's no hack for building a relationship. And so I think you have to get out there and do that. Now, one of the mistakes that I see new folks make is they get into the cold calling, right? And then they try to 20x that by calling thousands of people, right? I'd say, okay, stop. Make a list. When I started, I created something called the Famous 500. And it was a list of the top 500 clients that I knew I wanted to do a deal with sometime in my career, right? And I just called the same 500 people over and over again. Rather than call 1,000 people or 2,000 people once, if I call 500 people 4 times, I'm going to get success. And so the analogy I use is the first time I would call, they would immediately hang up, right? There wasn't even like a, hey, this is David Murphy. I'm with CB. And then I called back 3 months later and I'm like, hey, this is David Murphy with CB. And now I'm calling the same person. And they're still hanging up, but they're kind of remembering they talk to me as the phone's hanging up, right? By the time you get them the third time, you can sort of build some sort of rapport with them, right? And in the meantime, I would call and then I would send, this is, again, I'm going to date myself, but I created something called the Murphy Report. And I would just call and say, hey, I've got this great list of sale comps and lease comps. And this was back well before Crexy and all this. And nobody had any information. And so if you had information, it was like gold. And so I would say, hey, if you give me your fax number, I'll fax you my report. And so I did with the fax machine kind of the early of like broadcast email, but on fax machines. And I was faxing out this Murphy report. And I kept doing that until they changed the laws where you couldn't like just mass fax people anymore. And so I had to change my strategy a little bit. But to answer the original question of what are the mistakes, you go after too many people. And then the problem is, Jessica, you could make 50 calls and then somebody calls you back and you can't even remember why you called them or which property you called on. That's not good. It's better have you can start with 100 people, start with 150, 200 people, right? And just call those people over and over again and build a rapport. And for me, it takes 50 calls to reach 10 people, right? The other 40 don't even answer the phone. They think you're spam or won't answer, right? Of those 10, maybe one is lead worthy, right? And so 50 calls is one lead. And then it takes 4 of those leads to actually get a listing, right? And so it could take 200 calls to get a listing. Well, if you build rapport, they start calling you. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think it's really important to build a brand so that you have people calling you rather than you calling them.
That's fabulous advice. And I love the Murphy report, fax marketing before email marketing.
Old OG. Yeah, that's old school.
That's amazing. David, what are we touched a lot on, really building rapport and starting with a smaller group, right? So you can do that. What are some other key work fundamentals that you yourself maintain today?
I would say this. I would say the focus on first in the office, last to leave when you're newer, right? There's no hack that gets you out of hard work. Hacks just make you more efficient, but you still work incredibly hard. And so what I look at is some of the things that I do today. I've got a system. We have systems for everything. We have what we call our proven process. It's kind of like our E-Myth sort of thing where we go and make sure that we have a checklist for all of our things, right? So when I take a listing, we have a checklist and we run it through everything from did the listing get signed to there's a sign order to the marketing materials to the demographic report to the everything that we need to put together. That's on a checklist, right? Like before you fly the airplane, you've got the check. We have checklists for everything. So we built systems because the idea in our business is to get really good at something and then scale it. And if you have really good checklists, it's kind of easy to scale. So many of us, we're type A personalities, we're running around and we become very reactive. And if you're not on a system, then you lose track of things. It's too hard to keep track of it. So one of the things that we do is we have systems for everything, right? And then as far as we focus on being on the business, not just in the business. And what I mean by that is 2 hours a day, every day, I just work on our team's business. What can we be doing better? What new group can we be prospecting? What service line can we get into? What geographic location can we focus on? And so spending time, I think new folks that start, they're just executing. And I think you've got to really learn how to work on your business. And you're the CEO of yourself, and then eventually you run a team. But it's one thing, a lot of people focus on being the best broker. I like focusing on being the best in the brokerage business, and that's different.
I love that. And you're always looking to optimize is what it sounds like.
We're trying to get better. Yeah, we're always looking to, and I mean, the reality is every year our competitors get better. My goodness, there's always new people entering the business. The people that are already there are trying to get better. Nobody's happy that you have a lot of market share, so they're trying to get that. And their managers are on them to say like, well, why does Murphy have that listing? You need to get that. And so it's always, it's very competitive. But yes, we're always trying to find new ways of doing things to keep up.
That's excellent. How about you in terms of daily habits or practice? Doesn't have to be CRE related. Anything that's really become a go-to for you?
Absolutely. So I wake up at 3:30 in the morning and do a cold plunge. No, I'm totally kidding. I saw the look at you. You're like, what? No.
3:30?
No.
No. That might be the earliest I've heard.
Yeah, then I meditate for 7 hours and then no. I wake up around 6 o'clock in the morning. I've got 4 boys. And so 2 in high school and 2 are seventh grade twins. And so the early boys, our high school starts up early. And so I get up at 6, wake them up, do my 30-minute workout. I'm a 30-minute workout guy, but I do it every day. Consistency, right? I lift weights. I don't do cardio, but I lift every day for 30 minutes. And then after that, I make sure that the kids are eating, getting their breakfast, they've got their school, and then they're off, right? And then from 7 to 8 o'clock, I kind of will work on the computer, get caught up on things. And then the younger crew, they have to be on their school bus at 8:50. So it starts all over again. Now I'm waking up 2 more kids, getting that going, making sure they have their breakfast. Round 2. And then after that, I head down into the office. So, but the night before, I make sure I know what I'm doing for the day, right? So I'm big on to-do lists. I've got so many different notebooks, and I'm always keeping track of like what I'm doing. So try to know what I'm doing the day before. I'm big on calendaring and making sure I time block a little bit. And I time block for my prospecting every day, and it just sits there in a meeting, and I treat it like a client's coming in from out of town, right? Like I can't meet you at 2 o'clock. No, I've got another appointment. Well, that appointment is, we're so reactive. If you don't time block and treat it like it's an actual appointment with an actual client, it's not going to get done. And so I am big into time blocking, but not into 45-minute cold plunges.
No, I'm with you there. My calendar is fully color coded. I feel like the only way to get things done. I love that, David. So let's talk about what I'm sure a lot of our listeners are interested in, right? Switching gears over to industrial. Obviously, with 25 years of experience in the sector, you've seen all kinds of shifts. So how has the industrial sector shifted in the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's gone from delivery times of items from 2 weeks. I use the example that 10, 15 years ago, if I wanted to order my sport coat, I would go onto the JCPenney catalog, find it, order it. It would say it'll be there in 10 business days, which is like 2 weeks. Okay, great. And I didn't think anything of it. Well, the customer's expectations have gone from a 2-week delivery time to a 2-day delivery time, and eventually a 2-hour delivery time. And what does that mean? That has had a dramatic effect on the industrial market. This increase in e-commerce spend, for every $1 billion of additional e-commerce spend, it requires another 1.25 million square feet of industrial product. The impact has been huge. And so what's really changed from us just doing regular warehouse deals where we were focused on trying to get the client the best rate, to now it's all about efficiency. It's about optimizing. We were talking about optimizing my business. Well, in their world, it's optimizing their supply chain. And they're looking for the very best option, and they'll pay what they need to pay to get the very best option. And so for folks in markets like Florida, where I'm located, Florida has really benefited. It's why it's one of the hottest industrial markets in the country right now, because Florida used to be served from Georgia. And Florida is an expensive state to distribute to. We're a peninsula. We don't make a lot of stuff. So all the trucks that leave the state are leaving empty. And so it's a tough distribution state. But you can't have 2-week delivery times anymore. So all that product that used to be parked outside of the peninsula has to come into the state. And so it's driven so much industrial demand. And if you look at kind of like who are the users today versus what they used to be today, for deals over 100,000 square feet, over a third of deals over 100,000 square feet are with third-party logistics providers. And then you have general retail and wholesale companies are next. And then one of the biggest groups that we're seeing come up is food and beverage. And so we're seeing food and beverage, and that's become a big thing. So the users have changed, but more importantly, it's gone from negotiating the best rate. Going back, we used to really focus on trying to get that lease rate 25 cents a foot lower. And we would have 4 or 5 buildings competing with each other, and we would really go to the building with the lowest rate. Today, we do a fair amount of tenant rep. A lot of times, the tenant has already picked out the building before we even go on a market tour. And our job is just to do the market tour anyway, so nobody really knows what our number one pick is. And then we try to negotiate the very, very best deal we can at our number one pick. So that's really become different. And then the sophistication. Now I have to understand logistics, right? Before, I just had to know where the buildings were, right? And then I had to kind of know what the lease rates were. Now I have to understand the transportation system and how product flows and ingress and egress and labor's become a big thing. If you think about industrial real estate is only about 5 to 7% of the total cost of the operation, right? The labor and transportation costs are the big items. So even though I'm a real estate broker and I'm helping them find warehouse, a lot of times we're not solving for the real estate economic equation. We're solving for the labor and transportation equation. And that's completely different than what it was 5 or 10 years ago.
That's so fascinating and such a fast change, right? I'm sure a lot of that is spurred obviously by the pandemic. What do you feel are the short and long tail effects of these change in fundamentals?
Well, I think people are going to functional utility. And when I say functional utility, they want buildings with big truck courts that allow for trailer storage. They want ceiling heights that future-proof. And what I mean by that is they want buildings that instead of 20 or 24 foot high, they want buildings that are 36 or 40 or 50 foot plus high because they want to be able to store vertically and have more volume. They want power. A lot of our clients are looking for more power today. The conveyor systems and the material handling systems of these warehouses are intense, not to mention the onshoring that we're seeing and that manufacturing user come back. So I think what the tenant requires today is a lot more than people designed for when they were building buildings in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So we have a lot of product that is becoming somewhat obsolete. Now, the saving grace for the older buildings are a lot of times they're more infill, and infill product close to the population density is still really attractive. And to have a really good location that's close into that population density, people will get away with some lower ceiling heights or a lower land to building ratio with maybe a little bit less parking if it's close in. But we are definitely seeing our clients today looking for buildings that meet today's standards, and they will pay extra for that.
So that brings me right in my next question for you, David, right? So a lot of these older buildings that are not infill, right? What are you seeing from a construction, a development side of things, right? And obviously with rising construction costs, how is that impacting the sector's activity?
Yeah, it's become an interesting market because the reason why I don't do development myself is I always worried that I would develop the building and it wouldn't lease, right? Like that's always like my fear of being a developer. I love the third-party leasing side because I'm not in that. If the building sits empty, I might lose my listing, but I don't have to lose my house. What I'm seeing today is that's really not as big of a risk as it used to be. If you can build a building in this market, particularly in the growth markets like what we have in Florida, the chances are very high it's going to lease. The challenge is just having debt want to get involved in it, right? It's much harder to source capital today. You can get equity. It's harder to get the debt. And so what I think could happen is we could actually see more rent growth. In Florida, as an example, in Central Florida, we had 18% year over year rent growth. That's an amazing number. Wow. And so if you think about, okay, now a lot of areas around the country, you're hearing about a slowdown in industrial. We aren't seeing a slowdown in industrial in Florida, but it's still hard to get the underwriting in place for lenders to greenlight new vertical projects. So what could happen, or what we think may happen, is that the market's going to get really tight by the third or fourth quarter of this year because the supply has stopped and the demand keeps going. And so you could actually see more rent growth in 2024 because we're just not able to get as much supply up as we need to. And it's tough today to get it built. The yield on cost might be 7% versus 200 basis points lower 12 or 18 months ago. And a part of it is interest rates, right? I mean, it's just harder to make the numbers work. The cap rates have gone up. So the environment is more challenging today to develop. We are still seeing properties go up, but not nearly as much supply as we probably need.
So how do you think lenders are thinking about industrial now from a risk analysis perspective, maybe compared to some of the other asset classes out there? There's obviously a need to build, right?
There's a need to build. I may be a little bit biased towards industrial, but I'm incredibly bullish on the industrial side. And what the lenders are looking at, even with rates, right? I mentioned cap rates. The Treasury, as of the time of this podcast, I think is at 4.1. And so, You're looking at interest rates just in broad brushes with a 6 handle on it, and you got a yield on cost that's maybe 7. You need some rent growth in there to make these numbers work. But the analysts today don't want to give you rent growth. And so what we're seeing is we're saying, hey, look, over the last 5 years in North Florida, which is Orlando, Tampa, and Jacksonville, we've seen a 44% increase in rent, right? In South Florida, rent's almost doubled in the last 5 years. They're at like 88%. It's crazy. But what we're finding is when the analysts are underwriting these deals, they're not giving you that. They're saying, okay, look, if contract rent is bumping at 4% a year, this is what we're going to let you do in your assumption. So the analysts on the Argus run, they're trying to find ways to make these deals work. And the underwriters are being harder and harder on them. So there's only so many ways to make your deal work. You've got to have rent growth, right? Or what you might want to do is look at your cap rate at the end of so if you're doing a 10-year cash flow, your terminal cap rate, you might want to make that lower than what it normally would have been. And you can make the argument that, hey, rates are going to come back down. That's kind of a tough argument to make. But it is very challenging today to convince the debt market to move forward on some of these projects, even projects that by all accounts would be incredibly successful if they can get out of the ground.
That's excellent analysis, David. So what do you think, like when you're advising clients, right? What do you see on the forecast for not just the rest of 2024, but maybe going into 2025? What are some of the primary considerations when you're speaking with your clients about this?
I look at it and say, you're going to have, as long as people continue to move here and into the growth markets like in Florida, you're going to see continued demand. I think nationally, the view that we have is that the market's going to be very strong. And 2024, we think will be a good year. And it's hard because we're benchmarking against some of the best years of all time, right? Post-COVID, right. I don't think anyone thinks that those numbers are sustainable. But in some of the growth markets, I think we still have room to run. And Florida is one of those markets where we're seeing a lot of investor demand and a lot of developers are out looking for sites again. And that's encouraging. And so what I'm telling our clients is, if you're a long-term player in the industrial market, go to markets where you see growth and you see increased e-commerce spend. And Florida lights up on all those accounts. And so I think that you're going to continue to see capital rotate into industrial. Industrial has been kind of a popular product type. And I don't see anything out there from a macroeconomic standpoint or a market standpoint that leads me to any different conclusion in 2024 and 2025.
Thank you, David. Well, obviously with your specialized background and expertise, I'm sure some of our listeners would be curious about your answers to a few rapid fire questions or words of advice.
Absolutely.
Can I
Let's
throw
go.
a few your way?
Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So first question, if you were given $50 million today and you had to invest it immediately, like tomorrow, what's your go-to asset, location, a few details about it, and why?
Okay, so I would go into downtown high-rise office building. And no, I'm just totally kidding. No, don't do it. No, you can't. I just don't know because I'm an industrial person. But no, for me, what would I do? I would go and do industrial development. If I had $50 million, I would do a 200,000 to 300,000 square foot industrial development. I would do a lot of what we call small bay. And small bay can be buildings that are, let's say, between 100 and 180 feet deep. That's a pretty wide swath, but you can do smaller buildings, and that allows you to have smaller tenant sizes, right? Some people are into the shallow bay, really small bay product where they're doing 2,000 to 5,000 square foot units. We call that multifamily for industrial. And what does that mean is they'll have small units. They'll lease them out sometimes just for a year. And then they'll build a tiny little office space, and that's it. You can't add off. This is your unit and you're going to lease it and everything's great. And that is a very low, what we call WALT, weighted average lease term. And so the investors like the low WALT projects and they like the mark-to-market capability in a rent market that we think is going to continue to grow. So if I'm an investor today, I'm taking a hard look at those small bay industrial projects. I would probably go out and find a 30 to 50 acre tract of land and build, let's say, a 300 or 350,000 square foot project. And if you're in, and I'll be, again, biased because I'm in Orlando, but I love the Florida market. And I think you're going to see, we have tons of people, 1,000 people a week move to Orlando. So it's the kind of market that even if you screw up as a developer, you just have to wait a couple years and then it gets better, right? Even if you go one exit too far, just wait. You're going to be okay.
Where would your location be in Orlando? Where would you build?
So what's great about Orlando is we have two beltways, the 429 and the 417. So we've got kind of a 360-degree beltway around Central Florida. So you could probably go in any direction. I'm partial to South Orlando because if you look at our market, and we have a pretty small market, 130 million square feet in our inventory. Over half of that's within a 5-mile concentric circle of the Orlando airport, and so which is in South Orlando. And so most of your product, and again, a lot of this is the first generation 1970s, 1980s, early 90s product went into that location. That location's always going to be attractive. In the Northwest market, that's an area that's grown. We have an area called Apopka and Groveland and areas in Lake County. That area is attractive as well. So I think you're pretty well suited if you're anywhere within, let's say, 10 to 15 miles of the central business district, almost in any direction. Hopefully, this is encouraging a lot of investors to call me. So I'll be...
I was going to say, investors, listen up to where that location is. Call David.
And the crazy thing is it's hard. So much capital wants to place here. The real challenge is finding product. We spend most of our time, I mentioned the cold calling that our team does. Most of our calls are to existing property owners to see if they'll sell. We need product to bring to the market because we've got an almost insatiable demand of investors and capital trying to work their way in here to buy products. So we're really blessed to be located here.
I love that. How about something that you use day to day? Favorite tool or software?
So I'm just going to say I love Crexy. Is that?
I promise it's not a trick question.
You know what's nice about it? It's really user friendly. Is what I like. It's very user-friendly, and it's just people maybe take it for granted that you have this information today. Like I said, when I started, there was no I was using like a startup disk on my computer, right? I mean, there was certainly no database that had property owners and what the property was and the tenant that's in the it's just, you could do so much with it. There's a part of me that wants to go back in time and be the 25-year-old me that's now starting at a brokerage company. Because my goodness, the only thing that held me back in the beginning was lack of knowing who to reach out to, right? Now you have that. That was the hardest thing that I found to get going was I wanted to make the calls. I just didn't know who. Having a database of the commercial real estate market at your fingertips. For the new listeners out here, the people that are new, you have no idea. Please take advantage of that. You have no idea how valuable that is and how that allows you to do what you want to do in this business.
Well, and you have prospecting time on your calendar every day with your team, right? So you're still reaching out to, sounds like, owners to find new listings. Important piece of your job still today, right?
One of my favorite books is there's a Millionaire Agent book that Gary Keller wrote. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is listings, leads, and leverage. And that really stuck with me. And so I'm focused on the listing side. I want to control product. Do we do off-market transactions? Yes, we do off-market transactions, but I really focus on exclusive listings. And that's part of our business that I started early on. And I'd encourage listeners to really consider trying to control the product, right? Because if you control the product, it really gives you a lot of leverage. And then the second part is leveraging, and leveraging can be your time, it can be resources, having something like a Crexy that you can utilize to help you find. So for instance, when I list a building, what I can do then is go on that and find who are all the other building owners out there and what's their contact information. And then I can reach out and call them. That used to take forever to come up with. You had to like look in the phone. It was so hard, right? I mean, it's so hard. So I don't know if people are using these resources enough. Right? There is no excuse not to be successful in this business today with the resources that we have on hand.
I love that. Last rapid fire question for you, David. What would you say is the most common misconception about either your job or the commercial real estate industry?
Well, when I just say I'm in real estate, people ask what I think their house is worth. I get a lot of that. Industrial used to be the most uncool thing. We'd be at a cocktail party and somebody would say what they did, and I'd say, I do industrial real estate. And that was like eyes glazed over. They were like, where's that accountant or attorney I was talking to? Now, you at least have a little bit more street cred because everybody gets packages delivered to them and they know those packages have to come from somewhere. So it is a little bit cooler. But I think the biggest misconception is just when they see the commission check, people are like, wow, I'm paying that amount of money. And they don't see the amount of pain that it took to get to that point where I could advise somebody on how to sell this property and I could find the buyer. That happened through years and years of learning the business, learning who the people are to call, all the deals that we didn't get paid on, right? And so I look at the fee, and absolutely the fees are warranted when you look at the bigger picture, right? It's like the analogy of like why the plumber comes to your house and he spends 5 minutes and charges you $150. And you say that took 5 minutes, but the plumber said, no, it took me 20 years to know how to fix that in 5 minutes. That's kind of how it is in the brokerage business. And the very successful brokers out there definitely earn their fees.
Awesome. Well, David, as we wrap up, any parting words you'd like to share with our audience?
Listen, I love this business. If you have any questions ever, you can find me. I'm Doc High Guy on LinkedIn. I have a pretty good run there. On X, I'm struggling. Like I've got at 2,500. And then on Instagram, I have almost nobody.
That's a lot.
No, that's not a lot. And on Instagram, we have a French Bulldog, right? And so my wife looks at other French Bulldog pages. I'm struggling at like 950 Instagram followers and really like working my butt off to get that to 1,000. And these French Bulldogs have like 45,000 followers, right? So it's very humbling, right?
It's crazy. Any cute animal on social media, it's like hundreds of thousands.
I may just have my French Bulldog on here and I'll do the voiceover and put him on. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm easy to find online. And I encourage you, especially if you're listening to this, you're in the car, you're on a run, you're listening to this podcast, stay with it and keep working. The most important elements of commercial brokerage are hard work and resilience, and being able to take rejection after rejection after rejection and then turn it into success. It's really all you need. There's nothing else you need in this business. And I wish everybody the best of luck out there.
David, thank you so much. So insightful. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. And thanks again for your time. I know you're very busy, so we really appreciate you spending time to sit down with us. Thank you also for everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this episode, do not miss the next one. Visit crexy.com/podcast and sign up to get the next episode delivered straight to your inbox. And of course, you can also subscribe to the Crexy podcast on your favorite podcast app. And also check out our YouTube channel for video recordings of each episode. Take care and be sure to tune in next time. Thank you.